Okay, let's dive into a really fascinating legal puzzle that went all the way to India's Supreme Court. It's all about one simple question. Can a big cash loan just poof, vanish in the eyes of the law? We're talking about a case where two major laws went head to head, and the outcome is pretty surprising. So let's put you in this situation. Imagine you lend someone a pretty big chunk of money, and you give it to them all in cash. Then, when it's time for them to pay you back, crickets. Is it even possible that a court could turn around and say, sorry, that debt, it doesn't legally exist? Sounds crazy, right? Well, this isn't just a hypothetical. It actually happened. And the amount we're talking about? A whopping 900,000 rupees. That's the exact sum of money at the heart of a legal battle that went all the way to the top. And here's the kicker. Believe it or not, a court, a high court no less, actually said yes. They ruled that because of how the loan was made, that huge debt was basically worthless. It wasn't legally enforceable. So you've got to be wondering, how on earth did they get to that decision? All right, to really get a grip on this, we need to rewind and look at how it all started. Because on the surface, this whole thing seems incredibly straightforward. Just a loan or promise and a problem. So here are the basic facts. One person lends another 9 lakh rupees, all in cash. To pay it back, the borrower writes a check. Simple enough. But when the lender goes to deposit that check, it bounces. So naturally, the case ends up in a trial court. And the court looks at it and says, yep, this is a classic bounced check offense. The borrower gets convicted. Seems totally open and shut, doesn't it? Well, hold on, because this is where the story takes a massive twist. The borrower wasn't happy with that conviction, so they appealed. And the case goes up to the High Court. And the High Court zeroes in on one single crucial detail, the fact that it was all cash. Now, the way the High Court thought about this is really interesting. They brought up India's Income Tax Act. See, there's a rule in there specifically designed to stop big, unaccounted-for cash deals. It says you can't give or take loans in cash for anything over 20,000 rupees. So since this 9 lakh loan was all cash, the High Court said, aha, this transaction breaks a tax law. And this is the bombshell. The High Court took it one step further. They decided that because the loan broke the Income Tax Act, the debt itself was not legally enforceable. What was the result? The borrower was acquitted. Just like that. The bounced check? Suddenly irrelevant, because according to the High Court, there was no legal debt to pay back to begin with. This just throws up a massive question, right? You've got one law, the Negotiable Instruments Act, that says bouncing a check is a big deal. But then you have another law, the Income Tax Act, that's all about tracking money. So how can a rule from the tax law just completely wipe out a rule from the check law? It feels like they can't both be right. And that really gets us to the heart of the conflict. We're looking at a head-on collision between two important laws, and each one was created to do a totally different job. So let's break down the two players in this legal drama. On one side, you have the bounce check law. Its whole purpose is to make sure people can trust checks. It's simple. If you write one, you better have the money to back it up. On the other side, you've got the cash transaction law. Its mission is totally different. It's there to fight black money and tax evasion by cracking down on big cash deals. What the High Court did was basically say that the mission of the tax law was more important, so it just canceled out the check law in this case. Well, as you can imagine, a contradiction like that couldn't just be left hanging. So the original lender appealed again. And that's how this whole mess ended up in front of the Supreme Court, who finally stepped in to sort this out once and for all. And the Supreme Court's take on this? They were absolutely crystal clear. They said, look, breaking that cash limit rule in the Tax Act, yes, that's an offense. But the consequence for that is a penalty. It does not mean the original loan agreement is just erased from existence. Here's a great way to think about it. It's kind of like getting a speeding ticket. You have to pay a fine, right? That's your penalty. But getting that ticket doesn't mean your whole trip was illegal or that the journey never happened. The journey was real, you just broke a rule while you were on it. And that's exactly the logic the Supreme Court used here. So let's walk through the Supreme Court's logic step by step. First, they agreed, yep, giving that huge cash loan did violate the Income Tax Act, no question. But second, they pointed out something crucial. The Tax Act itself already tells you what the punishment is. It's a tax penalty for the lender. Third, and this is the key, the law never says that the loan itself becomes invalid. So, fourth, the conclusion is simple. The debt is still real, it has to be repaid, and that bounce check can absolutely be prosecuted. And with that powerful piece of logic, the Supreme Court completely overturned the High Court's decision. They sent the case back down, saying it had to be judged properly. They made it clear that the bounced check case had to go forward. Basically, the borrower couldn't use a tax violation as a get-out-of-jail-free card to escape a real debt.
Okay, so after all that legal back and forth, you might be asking, why does this actually matter to me? Well, this ruling isn't just some abstract legal debate. It has very real consequences for how money and debts work in the real world.
So, what are the key things you need to remember from this? Let's boil it down. First and foremost, a debt from a big cash loan, it's still a real, legally recognized debt. Second, if you're the person who gave the cash loan, you could be in hot water with the tax authorities and face a penalty. Third, a check written to pay back that loan is still a serious legal document. And maybe the biggest takeaway of all, this ruling slams the door on a pretty clever loophole. You can't just take a bunch of cash from someone and then try to use a tax rule to weasel out of paying them back.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty interesting question to think about. On one hand, the law penalizes the person who gives a big cash loan, but on the other hand, it protects their right to get their money back. So does this clear but kind of complicated position actually help the government's big push towards a cashless economy? Or does it, in a weird way, create a safety net that makes people feel more secure about doing these large cash deals? It's a really fascinating spot where the law and big economic goals meet.